Today we're going to do the brake pads and rotors on this 2009 Chevy HHR. It's a pretty simple task. Let's go ahead and get started. Doing the front brakes on a Chevy HHR is really not a difficult task at all. In fact, it's a great task if you're a beginner looking to get started working on your own vehicles. The parts are not very expensive or complicated, and the tooling that you need is minimal. I'm going to walk you through the steps as I do this to my car. I'm going to be replacing the brake rotor and the brake pads. And these brake pads I chose from Autozone, the Duralast Gold C-Max pads. These are ceramic formula pads, and they're a little bit higher end than your ordinary pad. Another reason I like the C-Maxes is they come with all the little fixtures that you need, and they also come with a packet of grease. And on the back of the pads they've got this little piece of fabric-like padding material that helps against vibration and squealing. If the pads you're using don't have that material on the back, then you may want to pick up some of this disc brake quiet, which you just smear on the back of the pads before you install them. One last thing, don't forget to pick up a can of brake parts cleaner. The bare essential tools needed to do this job are a 4-inch C-clamp, a breaker bar, which is just a long metal bar that can accept sockets. Here I've got a 14 and 15 millimeter socket, these are for doing the work, and a 19 millimeter socket for the lug nuts. Optionally, but very useful, a flat-headed screwdriver and a hammer. These are for getting stuck things apart. A 14 and a 15 millimeter wrench. Sometimes it's easier to get into places with these than with this. And a torque wrench if you want to torque or tighten all of the bolts to factory specification. Otherwise, you'll just have to make them good and tight, but not too tight. So, nothing too complicated or expensive here. In the back of the car, you can find where your spare tire and your jack are stored. If you already know how to jack up your car and remove the wheel, then feel free to skip to the 5-minute mark in this video. And coincidentally, this is also where your car's battery is. Yes, it's in the back of the car. The jack has a wrench attached to it, and this acts as both a wrench for the lug nuts and a handle for the jack itself. These are just plastic lug nuts for the hubcap, and they come off very easily. First thing I like to do is just crack the lug nuts loose with the tire still on the ground so that it's not fighting you trying to spin. I'm not taking them off, I'm just getting them loose so that once the wheel is in the air, they'll be easier to remove. Notice I'm pushing down to loosen them rather than pulling up. When you're pushing down, you get a couple advantages. You can use your body weight. If something slips or breaks, then you don't punch yourself in the face. And if something is really stuck, you can put your foot on the wrench and try to use some force that way. Choose a flat surface to work on. Put the car in park and chalk your wheels so that it doesn't move. It doesn't hurt to apply the emergency brake as well. A sticker on the side of the jack shows the jacking points on the front and the rear of the car, which are this seam right here, just like that. The sticker on the jack says this jack should only be used for changing tires, not for service work. And that's something good to remember, because a jack should never be relied upon to hold up the vehicle. Jacks can fail. You always want to put something else to support the vehicle, such as jack stands underneath it. If you don't have jack stands and can't buy some, then at the least put something solid under the vehicle that will stop it from falling in the event of a jack failure. This is important. And this is where your jack tool comes in. We've got the tire off the ground. We've already loosened the lug nuts. At this point, it should be a pretty simple task to go ahead and remove them. Be sure to put them somewhere where you'll never be able to find them again. And if the tire doesn't just want to come off, sometimes if you give it a good whack, it'll break loose where it's seized up to the hub a little bit. And here we are with the wheel removed, our brake rotor. This can be hot if you've just driven the car, so be careful. And here's our brake caliper. This is what squeezes the brake pads against the rotor to provide the braking. This is your brake caliper bracket. We'll get to that shortly. First step for us to do is get the brake caliper off. Right here and right here are two 14mm bolts that we need to take loose. Here's a view from the backside to give you a better idea where they're located. These are very easy to reach, and they really should not be very tight at all. Let's see if I can break this loose. There we go. And with those broken loose, I can simply unscrew them by hand. Not a problem. And this is where our piece of wire comes into play. Really, any kind of wire will do. We're just going to put it up over our spring and tie it on. And the purpose of this is to hold our brake caliper out of the way. You can usually wrestle these off without too much difficulty. You want to be careful of this flex line. This is a rubber hose and it is breakable, and that's why we're going to use this wire just to tie this little fella right up out of our way, like that. And while that's hanging around, we'll continue working down here. Here's our two brake pads. And with the caliper out of the way, they just kind of fall out of place like that. If you're just doing the brake pads, you don't need to disassemble any further than this. If you aren't replacing your brake rotors, you can skip to reassembly at the 13-minute mark in this video. Since I'm going to be changing the rotors as well, I'm going to need to go ahead and remove the brake caliper bracket, and that's done by removing two 15mm bolts on the back side here and here. Here's a view from the rear to give you a better idea where these are located. And these are torqued down to 80 or 90 foot-pounds, which is, it's pretty good there. So I'm using the breaker bar and a socket to get at these. There we go. That wasn't too bad. A breaker bar can be hard to deal with when the car is low to the ground, not a lot of space. So once you get them broken loose, either a simple wrench like this or a ratchet is good for doing the final removal. With the two bolts removed, our bracket comes right off. If this is the factory brake rotor on your car and it's never been removed like this one, then you may have these little sheet metal clips on one or two of your lugs. Those need to be removed. They're not much fun, but they're not that bad once you get the hang of it. I typically just use a screwdriver and tap it lightly, get things moving, and then once I can get behind it, I pry it back, and you can wrestle these off. It's quite a bit of work. Nowadays I just use a pair of tin snips and I cut them. Like that. And moving right along, with those clips removed, our brake rotor should come off. If you find that your brake rotor is seized on, some taps with a hammer will usually break it loose. They just get seized on with rust and so forth behind them. Things rust pretty good where I live, and I live on a dirt road that gets muddy, so there's a lot of grime. I typically just like to take a wire brush, clean things up a little bit, get the major chunks off. And as you probably guessed what this is for, the rotor. You want to make sure that you get it nice and clean and that it feels dry and not greasy. And the new brake rotor should just slip right on. It's recommended that you put on a lug nut just to hold the brake rotor in place while we assemble the rest of the components. Finger tight will do the trick. Now with our new rotor in place and our caliper bracket, two 15mm bolts in hand, we're ready to put this back together. I usually just get one threaded in just a little bit so things still flop around, and that makes it easy to get the second one lined up. And there, I've finger tightened the both of them. 15mm wrench to snug them up. Pretty tight. A lot of home mechanics will just make these good and tight, which is probably okay. They're supposed to be on this car 85 foot-pounds, which is not quite as tight as you would make a lug nut. So it's important that you don't over-tighten them to where you damage the fastener and make it weak, and it's important that you don't under-tighten it too much where it'll come out. I like to use a torque wrench, which allows me to torque or tighten the bolts exactly to the specification. Torque wrenches are not very expensive, and if you're going to be doing your own work at home, I highly suggest picking one up. It'll give you good peace of mind. This particular torque wrench lets you turn the handle to dial in the torque that you want. I've got it set right now for 85 foot-pounds. And the wrench should make a sharp clicking noise when I've reached the proper torque. Just like that. And now we need to pop the hood. This is to access the master cylinder's fluid reservoir. This is where your brake fluid is stored. You can see the brake fluid in the reservoir there, and the reason we need to access is to monitor the fluid level, because when we install the brake pads and we compress the caliper piston, that fluid in the lines is going to get pushed back into this reservoir, and we just want to make sure it doesn't overflow. Now the replacement pads are all exactly the same, so you don't have to worry about putting one in the wrong place. But if you look at your old pads, you may see this little clippity-doo-dah stuck on one of them. It's a wear indicator. When your brake pads wear down far enough, this starts rubbing against the rotor and resonating, making a really annoying squealing noise. So we need to take notice of that and take one of our new pads and the new clippity-doo-dah that came with them and stick it in place to match. These slide bolts and clips can be easily serviced right on the car, but let's take a closer look at them on the workbench. Here's our sliders, and you can see they have a rubber boot over them. You can get that boot to pop off where it's retained here, and this pin comes out, and it's important that this be greased up and able to slide really easily in there. And that's important, well, for your brakes to be able to function properly. Now you remember in our brakes that came with this little packet, that's grease for these guys. So if yours aren't sliding, then you may need to replace them. They can get rusty or damaged, and they do sell replacement parts for this. I'm simply going to make sure these are greased up real nice. I'm using grease from a can because I have some. And if you push it, this rubber boot will pop right into place. Isn't that a nice sound? There we go. Same deal for the other side. Pop that off. Make sure everything looks good, which it does. I'm going to give it just a little bit of a touch up. Pop it right into place. Now our little retaining clips here, I think that we can see them better with this part off of the car, although it doesn't need to be removed in order to change these. These are just sheet metal and they pop out very easily. And some sets of brakes don't include new ones of these, and that's okay if yours are in good shape. However, my kit did include new ones, so I'm going to go ahead and swap these out. So with the old one removed, I'm just going to wire brush that. Make sure it's as clean as it deserves to be. And then I've found the replacement part that matches the old part. And just put it right up in place there. Piece of cake, you can do that right on the car. No need to remove this unless you're changing your brake rotor. Now the purpose of these little guys here, they're kind of spring-loaded because they're made out of sheet metal. And they basically help hold your brake pad. At this point, we're ready to install our new brake pads. And remember, if yours don't have these pads already on the back, then you can apply some of that rubber material, which just creates a little bit of a padding on the back like the old pads had here. Just a very, very thin amount. The pads, they just fit into these grooves and go right into place. And now we need to deal with our caliper. This here is a hydraulic piston, and when you push your brake pedal, it pushes oil or brake fluid through these lines, and it causes this piston to come out, which squeezes your brake pads together, stops your car. Well, because your old brake pads were worn down thinner, this piston is too far out to fit on. So we simply need to push that piston back in. This is very simple to do. It doesn't take much force at all. Now, if you're worried about cocking the piston sideways, you can just lay something across. Like one of your old brake pads. And this is the part where you need to watch the fluid in your master cylinder reservoir. After you crank this in a little bit, go check the fluid and make sure that it's not overflowing or about to overflow. If it is, then go ahead and remove a little bit of fluid. You can soak it up with something or use a dropper or a turkey baster type device to remove some. And there we go, it's in. And now with our two 14mm bolts in hand, we're ready to go ahead and get the caliper put back in place. It should fit over without much difficulty. You need to push the slide pins in to allow it to fit. And then just start getting these two bolts threaded in. Like the other ones, just get them started, but leave them loose so things can flop around. until you get them both to where they're threading in nicely. Our handy 14mm wrench, and just snug these up softly. Not very much at all. The top and the bottom. So there we go. We've almost got everything put back together, but there's a few more little matters of business. One of them is this wire up here. Don't forget to remove it, because that can cause you some trouble down the road. And finally, we need to go ahead and torque our 2 slide pin bolts. These are going to get tightened to 26 foot-pounds, which is not very much at all. The torque wrench has a scale here and on the dial. You can see the dial here is set to 0, and right now the 0 is at the 20 mark. So I'm going to turn this up to 26. So with the 0 at the 20 mark, I'm going to click it until I get to the 6, and now the torque wrench is set for 26 foot-pounds. At this point, I just tighten the 2 bolts like I would any others until I hear the click. Just like that. Don't over tighten them. Also, make sure that your flex line is in a nice position where it's not all twisted up or mangled. This needs to be able to move freely. When you go over bumps, your suspension rides up and down, and this is to allow that movement. At this point, we've got everything put back together. Our bolts have been tightened appropriately, new brake pads and clips on, new rotor on. I've removed the wire that I used up on my suspension spring to hang the caliper from, and time to put the wheel back on. Now I'm just lightly snugging the lug nuts down. After raising the car slightly to remove the jack stand, I'm ready to lower it, then tighten the lug nuts securely. It's recommended that you re-torque them after driving a bit. You can see here how the fluid in the master cylinder did rise up a little bit, but it didn't overflow. That's good. So we'll go ahead and just get that cap put right back on there. And finally, I'm going to pump the brake pedal to go ahead and extend that piston that we compressed against the brake pads, get everything seated into place. So thanks for following along with me as I replace the brakes and rotors on my car. Please remember that I am not a professional, just a guy that works on his own cars at home. Use common sense and follow the manufacturer's instructions at all times. Only you are responsible for your own safety. Thanks for watching, and be safe.